Hey, I'm lurppis. I played CounterStrike for a living for 8 years. I've been on the desk for some of the biggest events for 5 years. I know nothing about CounterStrike, but then again, neither does Thorin. Welcome to his YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of the Know-It-Alls of Counter-Strike. For this one, kind of actually keeping in a theme of the last couple of episodes where we've tried to really come with like a proper theme, you know, like a real set topic. Lurppis Tommy here did a thread which basically was like, I would say it was like grounded from a business and like sort of entertainment field background where he basically broke down the fact that the Counter-Strike space loses money. The rough figure was about $50 million a year if you spread it across like ESL's share of Counter-Strike and then all the other people involved. And that basically the central point you made in this tweet thread, it's a whole load of tweets, I think it's about 15 tweets or something. It'll be in the description box of this video if people want to read it. But one of the key points was we either have to obviously improve monetization if we want the scene to be in a better space. I mean, obviously it's losing millions and millions of dollars. Or the other one was what? It was like we have to make the viewership even higher or something, right? It's one of the two has to happen. There has to be more money or more viewers, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're growing, then you're not necessarily concerned about what it looks like today if you think the pie is going to be even bigger in 5 years. But if all of a sudden you're not growing, then that means that you have to make tons of money at the current levels of viewership, which I think is a lot more challenging.
Right, and this is obviously based on two things. One, obviously the current model of how we monetize esports is pure, raw, brute force numbers, which you then sell to sponsors. So that obviously is the in my case, the latter option. You've got to make the viewership grow to make more money. The other thing to be said, obviously, is, let me think, what was I thinking about there? Oh, as you said, this is in the context, since you said if the space is still growing, people will essentially delay having to get a return back now. The problem here is, the context of this whole discussion is that CS viewership has actually dipped. So the problem is, if people remember last year when we went online and when there was all these like reduced costs, even behind the scenes, people were saying, like, this is great, the viewership's all going through the roof, like it doesn't have to cost as much to run events, etc. Just the public didn't necessarily know a lot of that. So let's start out on this topic then. Like, what is the big... basically, let me ask you like I'll ask the super like naive way of asking it. Why is it a problem that the CS space loses $50 million a year, or whatever it is?
So really, it's not a problem that it loses 50 million. It's how everything is changing. So it's not the absolute numbers today. It's the rate of change and what that implies for the future. So to break that down a little bit, it's fine to lose 50 million. It's even fine to lose 100 million or 200 million, but only if you think you're going to make billions sometime in the, semi-probable, semi-midterm future and not potentially 40 years from now. So as long as you're growing, if you're growing 20%, 30% a year, you're going to double in size every 2.5, 3 years. You double in size 3 times over a decade, all of a sudden you're 8 times as big as today. If the costs stay at all similar, at that point you're very profitable and, it's a very interesting business to invest in. On the other hand, if all of a sudden viewership starts seeming a little bit stagnant, it's not clear that it's necessarily going to continue growing. Well, at that point, you actually have a problem because not only is the investment that you've already put in contingent on there being future growth, given that you cannot monetize at that level today, or you'd actually have to pare back spending a little bit. And the real issue is not that you just have to pare back spending a little bit. Like, not many fans care about whether a device makes 30 grand a month or 10 grand a month, frankly. Like, I don't think that's a big concern for anybody. I don't think if anybody really cares whether ESL loses money or makes money, ditto for the other tournament organizers. Those are not concerns. I think the problem is, as we know, it's not only about what happens in the little vertical of Counter-Strike with the rest of the world ignored. It's actually what are the other alternatives. So, since I just happen to name drop device, we'll use him as an example. So let's say all of a sudden Counter-Strike viewership starts going down a little bit more. Everybody says, well, listen, guys, we'll have to take things down a little bit. There'll be fewer tournaments that'll cost less. Prize money will go down, so there'll be less earnings. Salaries will have to come down a little bit in the next negotiations. Say like half, given that they've been kind of, a little bit ahead of the curve for the last some number of years anyway. At that point, your earning potential is less, your direct salary is less. You might have other opportunities elsewhere, whether it's it's a semi-influencer streamer, or whether it's playing another game where you might make twice the money. A lot of these people, they're smart enough to know that them being professional players probably last anywhere from 3 to 5, like in the best of cases, maybe like 8-10 years. So it actually matters quite a bit how much money you make if you want to have a chance of retiring, living off of that, as opposed to just going on to like a completely separate career. And I actually do think for the people who have that opportunity, like it's smart to try to think of a way to save enough money to live off of that. At least, work on your terms going forward, as opposed to just working for the sake of working. So at that point, let's say salaries go down 50%, a bunch of those people will have better opportunities elsewhere. They might leave. Now, what happens to the viewer when they see the device, who's probably a top 5 player in terms of impacting viewership, having fan interest to these tournaments and games? If he leaves, well, I mean, he's going to take a bunch of viewers with him. That happens to a bunch of other players.
By leave, we mean like go to Valorant or something, right?
Yeah. Or like just becomes a streamer. Just doesn't play competitive Counter-Strike. No longer attends tournaments, represents NIP or any other team for that matter. Or at least not in the realm of Counter-Strike. And then the viewers, they see a different product. It's not the same players anymore. The players are the product. They're under different tags, and many of the tags actually have meaning and relevance and will bring viewership themselves, as we've discussed. But ultimately, like if you change the players altogether and do so too quickly, I think many of the viewers will disappear as a result. And especially if those players go someplace else where they can still be watched as an alternative option. So what happens then? Well, viewership goes down further. Well, what happens, Duncan, when viewership goes down even further? What do you do? Well, you cut costs more. You have to cut more.
Of course, yeah.
Viewership is even more.
Yeah.
So like
it scales down. Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, like, what's the solution? You need some miracle that's going to reverse course, and that's why it's dangerous and worrying to me, at least, as someone who's been in Counter-Strike for the better part of the last 20 years, and ideally would like to continue watching Counter-Strike for the better part of the next 20 years. It's concerning to me that nobody's talking about it, at least publicly. Obviously, there's conversations happening in private, and that it's just sort of like it's just not really a discussed or understood topic. And I think, generally speaking, people would benefit from understanding it better, because I think they would be more open to alternatives or different solutions, trying new things that might help if they knew what's at stake. It's a different thing to talk about, hey, can we change this or change that, or try this new thing, if it's only for the sake of changing versus something more meaningful.
I will say this does actually remind me of like whenever I see shit in the fucking crypto world, believe it or not, because people do love to do the exact same thing like you're talking about there, which is whenever the number goes up, they go, look, this is a direct correlation proving that my theories and, concepts of the market are all correct. When it goes down, the joke is they don't go, well, this proves that I'm wrong. And they go, this is still a good sign, but for a different reason. It's delayed progress. Like, we're getting all the wrong people. The right people are going to. Basically, I agree. Well, I'll say this: when I mentioned that last year, people were bragging about, the numbers are even better, and ESL having the gall to be like, oh, we've done even better than we thought this year with none of the fucking costs. Like, when they have the gall to do that, right? You're right. As soon as the numbers go down, and as soon as all the sort of markers and metrics are going in the wrong direction, they just don't say anything. People just don't say anything whatsoever, because as far as I can tell, this is the downside of esports, unfortunately, because it's so badly monetized. Even though it's not that it's a fraudulent industry, we're not selling people a complete pipe dream, but we are still selling them a kind of a dream, like you say. Like, it has to be. It can't be what it is. The problem. No one, if everyone was buying into esports today and you could actually tell them it will never get bigger, they wouldn't buy in at the prices they're buying in now. That's what I think the fan doesn't understand. Because what you said earlier, I'll give an obvious example from a different game, right? In League of Legends, one of the LEC teams, which is a franchise league in Europe for League of Legends, was a football club. It's Schalke 04, it's called, a German football club. And because the German football club itself is actually in financial issues because they got relegated or something, I think, from like the Bundesliga, they've basically sold, or they're about to sell it, to some French organisation in esports. And in doing so, they're going to actually sell the LEC spot for more than 2.5 times what it cost to buy in only 2 or 3 years ago. So when you consider the actual costs, what's wild is that already shows exactly what you're talking about, that fans will always understand. You're not buying what you're getting today. You're buying, in theory, what you speculate it will be. It's actually more like a stock, isn't it? It's what you think it'll be in a few years, which is why the wrong kind of downward trend. Yeah, the wrong kind of downward trend obviously makes you think, I want to get the fuck out, even if it's still worth something now, which a fan will never get, because they'll think, in this scenario we're talking about here, Tommy, they're going to think, but what do you mean? Device is still playing, Gambit is still, why would I worry about the things getting downscaled. It's like, because that's going somewhere, and it's going to lead to a lot of decisions being made based on what they then extrapolate out, like where they think the trajectory goes, right? So along those lines, right, two quick questions. One, why do you think, like essentially a cynical take, what is the reason why none of the industry people basically say this publicly? Because as you say, if there was a solution, it'd obviously be the initial thing. You'd say there's a problem here, we've identified it, and now we're going to implement solution X. But I will say it doesn't look like there are any solutions. And then the second part is basically, what are people... how far can the rot sort of go? How much more could we lose viewership? How much more could it like impact things before we actually see like way bigger second and third order like effects on the industry, do you think?
So I'll take the first one first. The first question you posed, which is so I think the reason people generally don't talk about it is most people who are knowledgeable enough to talk about it either have a vested interest in the overall narrative around the industry, around CounterStrike, around whatever, being positive. So it's not in their best interest to talk about something negative that kind of could take over the narrative, might show up in a Google search when they're raising funding the next time, etc. In ESL's case, very specifically, I mean, their parent MTG is a public company. So that they actually have, unlike many of the private companies, so for example my employer, they don't have to worry about what the stock market thinks the value is tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. They think they have to worry about the long-term impact, but they don't have to worry about the daily changes. MTG has a management team who has to worry about the daily changes to some extent, and by extension, therefore, ESL has to worry about what MTG thinks and what MTG's investors think, and that further limits them very specifically. Obviously, there's a bunch of
Can I ask for a quick clarification, actually? Because I want to know, I don't know this myself, but one thing I know that a lot of fans might not understand actually as a concept is the concept of fiduciary responsibility, right? And if people don't know, one of the things, for good or for ill, depending on what perspective you're coming from, about modern day companies, particularly in places like America, for example, is oftentimes when you go public like that, you actually have the fiduciary responsibility to the shareholder, right? The person who buys the stock. So as a result, what a fan might not understand is that means essentially if you take actions which you know will make that person lose money or lose value as a stock, they in theory could take you to court, right? You could actually get like sued over this. It could be like massive, right? Would that even apply to things like this? If you said things in media which were then perceived to have made the stock price drop or consumer investor confidence drop, would that potentially get you in any actual real trouble, do you think?
So, I mean, first of all, there's countless law firms that sue for less. So, there's like, how America is. There's text saying don't put your cat in a microwave because if it's not there, somebody will do it and then sue the manufacturer. So there's a very famous finance column called Money Stuff that's posted on Bloomberg Daily that's free for everybody, written in like a sarcastic, funny tone by a guy called Matt Levine, and he has a thing where he just says like everything is securities fraud. Right. So you say anything that could be perceived to be negative that could have a negative impact, it's securities fraud.
Because it could influence the way someone does something, right? Yeah, technically they're right.
Yeah. So, I'm not a lawyer. I understand the concept of fiduciary duty. I don't know how it applies in every single situation. Okay. It's different depending on where the company is incorporated. But so, for example, for Delaware companies, it's different than Nevada companies, et cetera.
Right.
With that said, yes, if you say things that are harmful to your shareholders, you could and likely will be sued for securities fraud, and it's possible that you've also violated your fiduciary duty.
Doesn't that, in a way, sort of make a bit of a mockery of the idea that we have all these fucking conferences and stuff where it's like, let's all get together and powwow and talk about what's wrong in the industry? Because logically, as an extension of what you've just said, certain people can't ever actually talk about some of the problems in their company or their specific part of the sector, really.
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends a little bit by person, company to company. I think for example, in my view, I think there's a strong case to be made that by talking about problems, you're actually more likely to solve said problems before they become too great to get around. With that said, people have different incentives and people have different responsibilities, etc. So you can't always fault people for what they say in public for those reasons, for example. So those are to your first question, some of the reasons why people don't talk about it. I think the other thing is like, look, like there's also a bunch of people who, let's say, used to work around it or are involved or friends with people who could theoretically talk about it. At the same time, like like if I stop working. Say after I have finance, if I then went in and like started talking about all the bad stuff there, and I have a bunch of friends who work there, obviously like in that context, like I have no impact. In esports, I might, but like it is kind of a dick move to some extent. So like you also don't want to do that in that case, for many people. So that's the first question, and the second question was how much would we have to go down in like viewership terms? Like when would the repercussions actually begin?
Because obviously the scale isn't linear, right? Like it's not like we drop another 10% and we only lose like X amount like that. I mean, the sad thing is it's kind of like what I implied with the crypto thing. I know pro players especially aren't thinking about this at all, Tommy, from the sense that they don't think about look how much their salary scaled in the last like 10 years. So I know a lot of them really haven't thought through how worrying this could be, right? So what's the panic station level? Like, are we already near there? Is it much more, do you think?
I don't think we're there yet. But like I would honestly rather start looking for solutions and like trying to solve the issue once I notice there is an issue, rather than when somebody hits the panic button. Because as you can imagine, like once somebody does that, you don't really know how it's going to work. It takes one big company to pull a bunch of investment from a game for everybody else to start second guessing it. I mean, like the way many of the
kind of like CSGO right now, right? That's, you saw it was just dominoes that fell, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I wouldn't say that we're like there. What I will say is, generally speaking, in many cases, you don't just like get out of things in the middle of like a contract period, whether it's by team or like an agreement to host some number of events or like a revenue share structure or something like that. With the exception of Cloud9, maybe they literally just cut bait. They just said this is not for us and we're out. In the middle of their contracts after spending quite a bit of money on buyouts and salaries, etc. So I would say for most people, I think it's a question of when our player contracts up. That's I think the first piece, and I think we've discussed this on previous episodes where like a bunch of teams have started picking up younger players. And it was not that long ago that the best player on a team usually had pretty much control over the roster, and they were all getting paid. It wasn't many years ago that it was like more or less standard for the teams to get paid the same amount across the entire team. That's no longer the case, not even close. Like now it's completely normal that the organization's view is we should, take NIP for example, like happy to pay tons of money for device, but we're not paying tons of money for players 4 and 5 on that roster to make up for it.
Yes.
And I think over the next year or two, as we see some of the sort of legacy older players' contracts run out, and as we see more of the youngsters do well, I think it's less and less likely that the former popular players who have years of experience are likely to get renewed at high rates. And like we've already seen this with a bunch of players that have sort of just like disappeared on the map. Like how long do you think it would have taken 2 years ago for that Flusha and Sunny roster to get picked up by somebody else, or the KNG roster after
Kenny S, Guardian? There's a madness.
I mean, it's just a lot of very popular names that have big followings and like drive audience, drive sponsorship interest, etc. And you just don't hear from them. And I like that's I think the first piece where people will feel it, and in fact are already feeling it. And I think the next piece is, like if you take a critical look of who's hosting CounterStrike tournaments today versus who was hosting CounterStrike tournaments a couple of years ago, I think there's starting to be some differences, not like massive, but some differences. If you look at the calendar for last year in particular, I think ESL had pretty consistently, excluding the majors, because those always drive the most viewership, they had basically had about 35 to 40% market share in the previous couple of years. And last year they jumped to like 70%, which I think is just like a good example of the change there. So obviously, like, good for ESL, like they're doing well. I think they're gonna have a lot of market power the next time any negotiation is up, and I'll be curious to see what the what the impact of that is. So I guess lots of rambling. So I'll just summarize my answer at the end. I don't think there is so one, it's not linear. I think something a couple of things go wrong and then a bunch of people react to those couple of things and it could get kind of ugly reasonably quickly. But it's impossible to tell ex ante when that actually happens or when that begins. Second, I don't think we're near the edge. I don't think there's a huge existential problem. In fact, I think current Cologne viewership doesn't look too bad. On the other hand, it is the first event in a long time. So, let's see if that's the everybody's excitement on a go forward basis for offline tournaments, or whether it's the equivalent of a major because it's the first time in so long. Because the viewership otherwise in the last 9 months has been very underwhelming, generally speaking. And the ones who are going to be feeling the pain first are players, and I think some of those players are already feeling the pain, at least to some extent.
Yeah, this was actually a topic we didn't talk about much on the whole player salary and buyout one, but I actually thought of just the episode wasn't long enough, which basically goes like this. I'm actually amazed, dude, that it's taken so long, because as you say, the way the team orgs have sort of cleverly cut the costs of the salaries is just don't bring in big names to replace big names. What you do is, if outgoing is a guy like Ethan, who I'm guessing was on a very good contract at AG because of when he signed, incoming is a fucking guy who played in tier 2 fucking Polish CounterStrike for about 5-10 years. So yeah, guess what? He'll play for way less money. He doesn't need 25k a month or whatever. But we're not going to be in a world anymore like we were only a couple of years ago, where the worst North player made 3 times more than some really good player who's in the top 10, but unluckily is on a small org, we're not going to be in that world anymore. But what I'm amazed by is this, Tommy, which is that it's taken to get to this point before there's been any kind of market correction on the salaries. Because to me, the whole last year, we didn't exist in the old market, like you said. If Kenny or Guardian became a free agent, I don't care what their stats page says on hltv.org, someone the next day would sign them. And in fact, some small org would even go out of their way to break the bank to try and get those players. That's the one time they could ever get a name like that, Someone would have gone crazy trying to get Kenny S. He could have been in any NA org for the last 10 years of CS. He could have done the move like people did, where, like when Flusher did, where you're a bit washed, so you just go to Cloud9 for a year and get a good, try and revitalize your career. People like these are being picked up instantly. So what I'm surprised by is that more orgs weren't cynical. Dude, I was amazed when I was doing all that reconnaissance work for Flashpoint last year, how many orgs were still paying all the same pre-online era salaries. Even people who'd re-upped deals, dude. People were re-upping deals for the same amount of money, the same salary that you had to get to go and play every LAN tournament in the world. They were paying people to play online tournaments. So, is this just an area where the orgs themselves were a little bit, normally people treat orgs like they're all cynical, evil, faceless corporations who do everything for profit. But in this case, I actually think, if anything, there was a lot of goodwill given to players last year.
I think it depends a lot. I think there's certainly some group of fans that would say that we did not extend a lot of goodwill. Whether I
Sure.
I would disagree on that.
Okay.
But I don't know that everybody would say that. I think there's there's a bunch of orgs that might be super player centric, all about player stuff, and I think those are some of the orgs that you were probably talking about. Just in their communications, how they talk about it, and they were probably the ones who re-up players at higher numbers. And then the other thing that I would just note is, and I think we specifically talked about this on the earlier episode, but there's teams for whom CounterStrike is a bigger part of their business, and there's
True.
teams for whom it's a smaller part of their business, and I think that drives their decision making to a great extent. So, for example, if you're Astralis, and let's just say, I think there was a report maybe a week or two ago that a bunch of their players are have their contracts expiring at the end of the year, including
Yes.
Zonic as well. So if that's happening, that's a lot more risky, I would say, to Astralis in particular, because they're a public company, but also because they really just have LEC and CounterStrike in really elite esports titles, than it would be for, let's say, FaZe. If FaZe lost their CounterStrike team, that does nothing for their business. Absolutely zero impact.
Sure. I mean, by the way, I'll even say, in case people think like I wasn't on my own episodes, I'm not talking about like the fan angle of like they should get paid less. My point I'm making, I hope I'm clear about this, is there isn't even the actual competition. Like, what would drive the salary up and obviously made them inflated was other people are willing to pay that amount. They are willing to set the market. I don't personally believe, I think maybe some orgs just didn't want to gamble this and play chicken with players, I guess. I personally don't believe that market exists at the moment. Like, it's so depressing, mate, some of the really good, like, you should see some of the really good coaches and stuff in CS where they've reached out to me like, do you know any org that'll hire me? And I'm like, I'll try asking, but there's like 2 that might, mate. Like, this isn't like 2 years ago when you would have had literally like 10 people knocking down your door because you're one of the best coaches or something, you know, like the market doesn't sit like the competition for some of the players seems way more limited than it ever was. Like now regional aspects, you don't go to lands, like there's a million factors that go against it. So, okay, there's one area, obviously costs could go down, right? The problem I actually saw in this thread that I think a lot of people it'll pass over their head was when you compared ESL's numbers from 2019, which was obviously the year with all the lands, to 2020, where most of the period, I mean, basically their first big event, Kovacevicd, was the one that had the no crowd, and then we went online. So they didn't get to do most of their circuit online as they would have done. Now, obviously, they're a company that goes all around the world, like roadshow style, setting up enormous events in stadiums. So you can imagine the costs are very high for some of this stuff. If they'd have held their major, by the way, there's one people don't consider, they would have burned a lot of fucking money on that Rio major, even with the factors in Brazil, of course. So the question I have is this, right? That implies to me that these TOs are going to have to start cutting their costs in these next few years because they got away with 1 year where there was a weird reason the cost margin was offset. Now, as we go into these next few years, I mean, the obvious one is this. Everyone's going to focus on ESL because we know their numbers, like you said. But the one that I worry about is Blast, mate, because Blast actually have literally no reason teams in the future have to play and Blast beyond the revenue they can pay the teams and to being a partner, right? So at the moment, they don't really have any kind of control like ESL does over the circuit to kind of like still be number one through other means. And the main selling point of Blast that everyone, including me, loves is the fucking super high production value. Well, the problem with that is I can tell you from being on the behind the scenes of Flashpoint and talking to people about production revenues and where they're at, dude, their production budget is enormous. Enormous. Imagine they'll fly everyone there to be on site and all the fucking super high level camera stuff. Like, surely these companies, like, they're going to feel the pinch soon as well as players, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in Blast case, I think they've still yet to really scale. Some of it is because they're new. Some of it is from changing the business model. Because as you recall, they sort of did like a circuit style structure for the first 1.5 years really before reverting to what they currently have. I do agree. I think Blast has the best. I think Blast has the best product out of anybody in CounterStrike. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, would I run the tournament structure differently if I could? Yes. I don't like the tournament structure, but I think the product in terms of the actual production, I think, is by far the best when it comes to Blast. I think their issue is they just don't have the kind of scale that ESL has. I mean, I think it was Richard who posted the Louvre agreement, right?
Yes,
I think it was him who put that out there. So, like, you know, everybody can go look and see like what some of the restrictions are on all the teams that are part of the EPL. Everybody can see like how many tournaments they have to attend and that they can only deny attending so many events regardless of reasoning. Yep. You know, like it's just a lot of power. And I suspect, I mean, if I'm ESL, like I'm going to have to exercise that power in some way. Like, I haven't spent enough time thinking about it, what that precisely means. But like, you know, what might it mean is maybe there's a structure where more of what would have been like a 16-team tournament now turns into like a week-long qualification stage online, then like a 4-day break, and then like top 8 offline or top 6 offline. Like, that seems like a pretty good solution. That would cut cost. I don't think it would impact revenue. Like, that's a potential solution.
It's not actually even that far if you think about it, just conceptually from what they already planned for this year. If you remember, it was going to be that you'd be on like LAN in, I can't remember if it was Katowice or Malta or something. You'd be on LAN in one place and then you'd like a central spot if you remember, and then you'd like fly out to the playoffs if you made it, which already implied like something like almost like a more extreme version of what you're talking about. But this would obviously just be to save costs online, right? Basically, the idea would be, think about if people are watching IEM Cologne right now, imagine if only the playoff teams were the ones that actually went to Cologne. Imagine if everyone else played online to qualify for that stage. By the way, that would even have worked because we had like the week off or whatever, didn't we? So you think that could be the future then?
I mean, that's my not even half baked. Like I just got the flour from the store idea, just based on 5 seconds on thinking. But like that would save cost. I don't think that would really impact revenue. I think what that would require is for teams to have like centralized locations where they play from to make things better for them. But that's something that the teams can figure out and doesn't really impact ESL the same way. The other piece is because ESL actually controls so much of the circuit, they have much more leeway in like, if there's a substantial difference in the economics, they actually can throw more of it back. Blast's issue is, without going into any information that isn't publicly available, is that you can see where their revenue is and you can see where their costs are. It's just it's smaller scale. So even though the delta between revenue and cost, so the cash burn that they have on an annual basis, is much less in dollar terms than for ESL. It's a higher percentage of their total business.
Yes.
So for them, they would have to grow significantly more to get there or come up with other ways of kind of bridging the gap. So, ESL has the most market power, I think, to a bit of a worrisome degree in some ways. So I think I think something like that is what you probably have to do unless you find a way to monetize users. But so far, the tough thing is it's all indirect monetization. There's no place where somebody actually, outside of buying like low margin merch, no one actually gives ESL their money. ESL doesn't hold, outside of ESCA, to my knowledge, doesn't hold the credit card details of mine, for example. They don't have my credit card, which means I can't give them money even if I want to. I can't pay them for this broadcast that I have on right now in front of me, even if I want to. I'm getting it for free, and then somebody at Twitch is trying to sell the fact that I'm watching this, and I'll be watching the ads for some portion of the time, and then ESL will get a piece of that, except ESL doesn't actually get the full piece of that for the obvious reason that the reason sports media rights deals are a lot bigger than in esports, besides just the absolute numbers being a lot bigger, viewership, etc., is that in traditional TV, what happens for cable is they might overpay to lose money on the NFL rights. ESPN might lose money on the NFL, might lose money on the NBA, but once they have me, I'm paying for cable. They show me these other things that I also watch, and then they make tons of money off of those other things. That doesn't really exist the same way. And what happened, and I think I mentioned this in the tweets, is what happened a couple of years ago is when Facebook tried to get in, Mixer tried to get in, YouTube made a concerted push to capture some more of the streaming, is like people didn't really, I don't think, really give them a chance. Like in some cases, like partly understandable, like the Facebook tech just wasn't good, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, like I thought that the live video player would be a commodity by this time. Apparently wasn't for Facebook. I also understand, a big talking point at the time was also that Facebook's viewership numbers were very low. I've actually heard from people working there that that's because they I think it only measured like people who were
logged in or something stupid.
Users. Yeah.
So basically, if you were watching but you didn't want to comment, I think you just didn't count or something stupid. Yeah,
exactly.
It's mad though, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And like that was actually a big thing. Like people talked about that all the time.
Yeah, people kept saying like there's only 1,000 people watching it, which couldn't, by the way, no matter what you think about the platform, couldn't have been true for some of these matches. Like, these were enormous tournaments, so sure. Yeah. And like, I think ESL Claudius was on there like 1 year. So like, come on, man.
Yeah, I think ESL 1 was specifically on Facebook
that
year. Yeah, I mean, so like, like I actually think the YouTube platform is much better. It's just like a superior product. I think there's no question about it. But, they could not move viewers because they were just like stuck on Twitch. So like a bunch of viewers, what they would do is they'd go watch like the Russian stream that happened to be on Twitch instead.
Yes.
And as a result, like, of course, the others can't pay up for the rights, which means that everybody wants to go back on Twitch. Well, guess whether Twitch is going to pay for it when they know that they're getting it for free. Well, they're definitely not paying as much as they otherwise would. Who knows how big that delta is. And the other monetization is just indirectly through sponsorships. And one of the, in some ways, unfortunate things about that is I think you'd really have to get good at targeting ads to monetize that effectively, because it's so global. It's not like you can just sell these ads to the American viewers. You sell these ads to the British viewers. You sell these ads to the Dutch viewers, etc. It's like I'm guessing like this match right now is being watched by people from 100 countries easily.
Yes.
And it's not like one country is 40%. I'd be surprised if there is any country that's 10%. Like, I doubt that there is a 10% country there.
Maybe Brazil.
Like,
not impossible.
Yeah,
could be it.
Brazil could be. If there was a Brazilian team playing, Brazil would be there.
Yes. I see what you mean over the overall entire package of the whole tournament. Yeah, of course.
Correct.
And the problem there obviously is, by the way, even if you show the commercial, you're showing the commercial for like the BMW, but then to the guy from fucking India who might not ever buy a car. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense as a business model, does it? Yeah.
Correct. And like, I don't know how well targeted the advertising is on Twitch. My guess is it's not as good as Facebook's, for example. Facebook is the best in class when it comes to that. And the other thing is like you would need to get to millions of viewers for each of those categories to be of interesting size. So you might have 200,000 viewers. Like, that's great. NHL teams, like I think NHL teams have like on average something like 20 to 50,000 viewers in their local broadcast. So I'm guessing like NBA isn't much above it. Like, call it 100K people who watch like the Oklahoma City Thunder game on the local broadcast when it's not on national TV. But the reason is that's all local. So that's 100,000 people who, if I own a business in that city, who will come by within 10 miles every single day of their lives. So if I advertise, that's a user that I can potentially really get money out of. But when the problem is that it's like 10% out of 200,000 might be British, of which let's say 1/3 lives in London. 10% is 20,000, 1/3 is 6,000 in London. Now it's the equivalent of 7,000 users that I'm trying to sell for advertising in London. It's not big enough. You'd have to you would have to have like very good targeted advertising to get to all those people, such that you could actually monetize all of them in full. Again, I don't work at Twitch. I don't know people who would talk to me about this who work at Twitch. But I suspect that that's a pretty big problem, because based on the historical numbers that have come out from Twitch and like some industry estimates, they're also not monetizing as well as you would think that they would from the viewership numbers. So that's my sort of not even an educated guess, but just my guess of what the actual issue is. So it's the leverage in negotiations. Twitch has all of it. Nobody else has any of it. And then two, it's that not even Twitch can really monetize just because of how the cohorts work in Counter-Strike viewership.
Yeah, if people don't realize, that's also a marker that's really negative from the last 3 or 4 years of esports, which is, if people remember, the obvious like landmark deal was the big Twitch rights for Overwatch League in the first season, where it was like $80 million for, I can't remember if it was 2 years or something, whatever the span was. But at the time, the reason why a lot of people were excited by that was it opened up the discussion again of like, wow, broadcast rights will be a big thing that people are bidding over. But as you say, if anything, that trend has gone the opposite way. Now, people, just like ESL, as we said before, if push comes to shove, ESL will exert a bunch of influence that has fuck all to do with them spending more money. They just are in position in the industry to essentially have like a pseudo monopoly. Well, Twitch has an even more powerful pseudo monopoly in that sense. Like, as you say, people would literally, and did, choose to not watch the game in their own native language and watch the fucking Russian stream, just go to a different website in their browser. So as a result, you can imagine, like, esports fans are a joke in terms of trying to get the money out. It's more ridiculous than that saying we have in English, like trying to get blood out of a stone. Like, these fuckers just, it's like they take pride in the fact they won't pay for your product. Like, the same guy who sat there drinking a fucking soda and eating some shit food, all of which are mega overpriced and would cost more than a subscription. He like loves the fact that he won't give you 1 cent out of his fucking pocket. Because the reason why obviously the broadcast rights one is a big deal is because that could have been another way that it's not the end user, the actual fan, that has to pay. Someone else would pay on his behalf. But as you say, the analogies, you picked a good one there actually with the streaming service one, because yeah, it's true. If there's something on, Netflix is the obvious example, that would attract me to buy the Netflix subscription, odds are once I get it, I'm going to find all the other great shows I'm going to keep watching anyway. So it doesn't matter how much that one show costs, because look at the impact
user
it has.
acquisition is what you're doing through that. That's why you get the marquee content, so that you get the users who then stay for the other stuff.
The other obvious famous example in a lot of Western countries is the loss leader in the supermarket. Like, the most famous one ever, I'm sure it's the same in your country, it's the same in every country. It's always Coca-Cola, isn't it? Like, there's always a 2-litre Coca-Cola bottle that's like €1, even though everyone knows, like, the 500ml bottle from the corner shop costs like over €1. So in theory, right, you are losing money, but the whole point of why they do that is because you go there knowing that it's super cheap to buy the massive Coca-Cola bottle, and you buy all the rest of your fucking shopping there that week. Everyone knows the way the fucking business works. That's why it's called the loss leader. The The problem basically in CounterStrike, to bring it back, is that doesn't exist right now. There is no such thing. There's no reason to overpay for the broadcast. Right? If I was Twitch, by the way, this is what, I mean, I'm not evil, but if I want to only make money, this is what I would do. I would pay fuck all for the rights, because you have to be on it's the other way around. Because of the way Discovery works, it's probably also why those Russian broadcasts get so many views. The person's going to find their way to one of my streams anyway, mate. If you want to watch your stream, if anything, maybe you should be paying me. That's how fucked the industry is. Eventually, if they really want to, Twitch could start running the game the opposite way and be like, you know what, ESL, maybe you should pay me to be on my service. Well, now, listen, we're probably a bit away from that, but it's not impossible.
Well, I mean, look, if my job were running Twitch and I wanted to make money, I certainly would have paid promotion for streams. There's absolutely no question. That would be one of the first things you would implement. And people who read about this stuff, follow the industry, etc., or read the most recent book about Amazon will be aware of this, but I don't think people in general are. But Amazon's search function is actually the second most popular search engine, at least in the US, but I think it might have been like all the countries where it's present, like all the big countries. So like Amazon actually now makes billions a year from their search advertising, which is actually not that different. Okay. And Amazon is the parent of Twitch. So like, yes. If I wanted to make money running Twitch and I happen to be a CEO, I would get the same, targeted advertising running there. And that's what I would do. Duncan, you want to become a streamer? Well, guess what? Today, if you gave me $5, I'd put your stream above there for 1,000 users, and I would tell you after how successful it was at converting other people to stay there. And let's see how many of those become your subscribers over time. And if you spend $5 and you realize that, hey, I actually made 7. Well, you know what that means? You're going to spend 10 and 100. Yes. And as long as it's positive, you'll put in endless money because it leads to more money coming your way. So, I mean, that would actually be the very first thing that I would do if I were running the company. I'd be surprised if we don't get that at some point.
Right, then on the other side, because obviously, if you notice the way we've set up this episode, we've basically tried to talk around what are the most impossible problems at the moment. Now, you led into it. Even though at the moment, conceptually, it does feel impossible to actually get people to pay money for the product. The problem is, it's the most obvious initial solution to this issue, right? Because we know the people have the money. They're literally the most fucking sought after demographic in the entire world. As I alluded to, they already fucking spend the money. They'll spend it on any other shite because of how marketing works. It's just for some reason at the moment, they won't specifically pay, in this case, for Counter-Strike. Now, there's a million aspects to this that I don't really know. I want to see where we want to go with this, because on the one hand, on some level, I do still think it would be possible to make a pay-per-view tournament. It's just part of the problem is this. You can only sort of do it if you're already one of the power. You have to basically beat ESL or Blast, because first of all, if you don't have the top teams, no one's paying. If they're not paying for free Counter-Strike now, no one's fucking paying for basically like the field we had in Flashpoint 1. No one's going to pay us for that, no matter how good. I could make production value 10 times better than Blast. No one's paying for that if they won't pay for ESL Clone, for example, right? But the other angle on it is this, which is when I think about the pay-per-view angle, I don't really know at the moment what the hook would be still. Because as far as I can tell, the only way I could do it tomorrow is I'd have to probably be like ESL, and I'd almost have to say, I'm just going to take away most of the big tournaments from you. You've got to pay me to get them back. Like if you want Cologne, you've got to pay for that. Or if you want kind of eat to come. What else can you do at the moment? How do you bridge the gap, do you think?
Well, so, I mean, I'll just quickly comment on that before I go to the other stuff. But I think the way you would have to do it is you would move just one of those tournaments behind a paywall as like a test run. And you'd make sure that it has the biggest prize pool of all of them, even bigger than majors, ideally. And then, you run the risk and you find out whether people are actually willing to pay or not. I do agree. It's weird how people are sort of like, proud sometimes that they're not playing. I mean, with the number of hours that I watch Counter-Strike, like I would gladly pay for it, but if you're giving it to me for free, then like why would I? And I guess the one point that I would just quickly point to that I've made previously but I didn't sort of hit on is, right now on my screen there's a DHL ad during the broadcast, the Gambit Face game is on. If you think that Twitch can't target like perfectly to all the users watching from different countries, which is like they can't perfectly, but they still can. It just won't be perfect for a number of reasons. The static logos that are part of the broadcast, they're not targeted at all. You see it there. Yes. Somebody watching in Australia sees the logo. Somebody watching it elsewhere sees the logo. And that only I mean, you could still have global companies that are present in all those countries or most of those countries, and it's valuable for them, but it's not targeted the same way, which means you're never getting the maximum value for what is actually in some ways the most valuable spot. Okay, so in terms of the other ways of bridging the gap, so look, ideally, I think what you would do is you would start offering a better product and you try to find ways to charge for that. Now, what might
Isn't that in some ways, though, like a catch-22? Because the problem here, lurppis, is they already compete against each other by trying to offer a better product. And so in doing so, I feel like they've painted themselves into a corner. Because here's the joke, right? The best actual way to do it, I've realised, is this. Imagine if you went back to before 2020 and Blast was the pay-per-view, but then they came with this increased production. Now there'd be like something I felt like I'm getting for the money. The problem I feel like right now, I know it might sound like a temporary concern, but I feel like if tomorrow you made any of these tournaments pay-per-view, you'd have to like add extra shit you don't have, because you shouldn't, by the way, because as we're talking about, it's like the NFL. I'll pay to watch the NFL game, but the problem is at the moment a fan would be like, but I already get it for free. You know what I mean? Like there'd be that mentality to overcome, wouldn't there?
So what I was going to say is by better product, I don't mean like marginally better production value, better HUD, better that. I actually think you need like customization to some extent.
Right.
So like I think it would have to be like, first of all, like I still don't know why I don't know why I can't have the snipe functionality on Twitch. Like why do I care what, like the way the games are observed is for the person who kind of knows the game and needs to follow, and crucially, so that the commentator can stay on top of the game, because they're not the same person. Unlike, 8 years ago when you and I did these events, you were still the person kind of clicking around. Yeah. So you could be a little more aggressive with the changing. Yeah. So first of all, like I would pay money to be able to click around myself. And I used to pay for Snipe because I just think it's a much, much better viewer experience that I can click around myself and see what I actually want to watch. I think that's one thing. I think fewer other people would pay for that than you might think, as we saw with Snipe, though I think there's other reasons for that too. I think the other piece is, I think it's very clear based on comments that the stated preference is that people would pay to have different casters. Now, I don't know if that happens in practice. People say things revealed versus stated preferences. I think if you structured the schedules so that you were playing 12 hours a day and people could do multiple games, I do think you could justify having a couple different sets of casters for games, for example. So
that's a good angle.
So let's just say you could choose now as a viewer, you're a huge Anders fan. Now, you can have whoever's casting this game. We're talking, so I have it muted. I have no idea who's casting the game. But you could have them, or you could have Anders and Semler. Or, you could have fans vote and say, who do you actually want this? And maybe you bring back Henry to do it. Maybe Chad's doing it. Maybe Semler's doing it. Maybe it's a new combination that hasn't been used before, as long as it's one play-by-play-ish guy, one color guy. These kinds of things. I honestly have not thought about this.
That's not a bad angle, because that's almost like, like a Patreon tier type approach where you do get a perk for the money, so you feel like you have some input in it. Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
So, I think things of that nature that actually make it better. Now, here's the way I would actually do it if I really needed to make this thing profitable. And I think that would lead to the most money, but it would make people very unhappy in the short term, is I would put a 5-minute delay on the broadcast, and you can get the live broadcast for a nice monthly subscription.
Right. By the way, I don't even hate that, because if people don't know, the original models of pay-per-view that worked, or in some sense worked, were mainly the Korean StarCraft / early League of Legends related ones, where they had a pay-per-view, like GSL used to have to pay for, except unless you wanted super terrible quality, you had to basically pay. Then also, I know OGN Champions and League of Legends, again, you could either watch it free at okay quality, or you could get the VODs and watch high quality. Because there's I've just hit on another massive downside. We've also been giving every motherfucker the VODs for free for 10 years now as well. It's this is one of those areas where, here's the difference, right? I have a lot of sympathy for Team Orgs, because some of the people who came in and inflated and fucked their market economically were just people who were millionaires just playing around doing whatever they wanted. The people who are the TOs, I have very little fucking sympathy, because you all did all this to yourself. You made a product that is actually awesome. By the way, I agree with what lurppis said. I would, even though I might dislike some of the things about ESL, I would pay myself to watch ESL Cologne, of course. It's a fucking sick tournament.
Obviously.
Yeah, I love CounterStrike, so of course I would pay either a specific. By the way, I would not only pay a monthly fee, I would pay a specific one-off fee for that tournament. But if I myself am in a position where it's like that, like you have been giving me everything for free for so long, it would feel weird still, you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, like let's say in the entire ESL circuit, everything ESL, everything DreamHack, because they're part of the same company now, everything ESL One, IEM, all of those tournaments for Counter-Strike, you had to pay $2 a month. You know, like it might vary by country. Some people won't have like easy access to credit cards, so you have to like kind of solve around it. But you have to pay $2 a month to get something better. I have to imagine a very substantial number of people would subscribe. Now, let's just say that for $10 a month, or maybe it's 5 to 2 depending on country, and then it's between 10 and 20 depending on country. You get the 0 delay one, and like let's just say there's no ad breaks, and during those ad breaks instead, there's some kind of like
Shoulder
like
content or something.
separate desk thing. Like it's like Yanko and Chad and you and whomever just like chatting during the breaks, and you get that instead of going to commercials. Like, there's things. The problem is, like you said, the Counter-Strike product is actually fantastic. Like, it's really great for viewers. Like, it's great for viewers. I love watching it. So, like, the problem really is in some ways that we created this, like, amazing product and we just gave it away for free.
We spoiled everyone.
And then all of a sudden, like, money just never appeared from anywhere. And now our question is like, okay, like, we have this great product, but everybody's always gotten it for free. So how do we rein it back?
Let me ask you a cynical question, because here's another angle I've thought of. Well, another thing that always holds back the esports industry is none of us will, I'm saying us in like the general sense here, obviously like the collective, none of us will ever do anything short term that limits us a little bit to make the greater scene grow for everyone, because in part, the people that we hate, our competitors, would also benefit. So fuck everyone. Everyone always does the prisoner's dilemma approach, right? So here's one problem I think already. The most eligible person to do this, as we've just said, based on their control over the scene, is obviously actually ESL, because they're the only ones who basically, they almost can't die in a year or two, even if they actually had big problems with this. And I actually also think, like we were talking about, with events like Katowice and Cologne, they're probably the only people who could like brute force like a certain amount of fans to at least start buying the product. The problem is this, right? When I think cynically about what could fuck that up, I think of this. If I'm someone at ESL, I'm sure they're also doing this equation, Tommy, which goes like this. But if we do that and we potentially lose any viewership and early on it looks like it's going bad, isn't that a hit to us and a benefit to, say, Blast if they don't have the pay-per-view? Instead, wouldn't it be better for us to just hold position? This sounds familiar from Flashpoint. Let's just hold position for as long as we can, hope everyone else just leaves, and then we have a bigger pie to have our share from. Because obviously that's going to be the cynical thing, right? They're going to say, why don't I just wait and hope Blast burn themselves out with this money, Flashpoint goes away, and then in maybe 2 years, Tommy, maybe I have the whole space, and then I do my pay-per-view. Wouldn't that be a problem? Is that not a concern?
Well, I mean, look, it's like, that's how we started the discussion, right? It's like the different incentives. It's not, it would be very different if you have to control the whole ecosystem and you could just decide what to do and how to solve for it. You just have a lot more tools at your disposal. I think with the way...
How would you weigh that gamble up, though? Like, if you were really in that position, so you're asking yourself, like, either I succeed now, and obviously if you succeed, by the way, the upside could be enormous. You could have, like, a massive revenue column that no one else has. But the downside is you might potentially, like, risk some of your market share or something. How would you personally weigh that up if you were an ESL guy, do you think?
Well, I mean, so one, like, this is just noting that this is based on, like, my understanding of their business and what's out in the public, etc. Like, specifically what's out in the public and what's, like, not like stuff that I might have heard in private. That's not to be mentioned, but like, like I would at least try new things. So, do I think that their business just like completely tanks if they try hosting Cologne or Katowice once as like a separate structure with like some of this stuff? No. Like, is there like some blowback? Of course. Like, the problem is like every single time there is any change whatsoever, there's blowback. So like, to some extent, if you're not happy with status quo, like you just have to embrace it. You just have to accept it. People are not gonna like everything you do. Like, I'm sorry, that's just the reality of life, and that includes like people, your customers. It probably includes your investors too. But they're not gonna like everything. Hopefully, they like the big picture, and you get to the right place. But like, I think you have to be willing to experiment a little bit more. And like, look, these are things that we came up with based on the 5-minute conversation without like planning for it, without thinking about it much in advance. I'm sure there's other ideas, and like there's ideas that I have in my back pocket that I don't want to talk about because maybe there's a chance that I in the future have a chance to use some of them. But like there are other ideas. There's a bunch of people in the industry who have other ideas as well and who have had the same ideas. There's no question about it. It's only a question of like why are they not being implemented to any extent? And I think there would be benefits to at least like trying a little bit more different things than is happening today. You don't have to commit to something completely different. I also, even the Facebook deal at the time, I think like that was trying something different. But it seems like since then, I don't really know that much has changed off the top of my head. I don't know if you feel differently, but to me, it feels like that was the sort of the last like bigger swing, if you will.
I mean, one thing I will say that is actually a massive hill to climb there, because as you pointed out, where basically the contrast has to go like this. It can't just be Facebook or Twitch, because we know those are unfortunate with night and day. Like, obviously, the experience on Facebook was pretty bad and it had loads of flaws. It never delivered on what it promised and blah, blah. Like, listen, that's the easiest one of all time to destroy, of course. Everyone thought the actual product itself wasn't good, right? Still to this day, a lot of morons don't realise, me, you, Richard Lewis, we were never arguing that Facebook was going to be awesome. We were arguing that the precedent was important, hence this episode now, for example. But the more obvious one's obviously YouTube, right? Because YouTube already had a fantastic fucking service. Like, I even said it back then. I noticed, by the way, dude, it's only the last few years people are starting to come back around to my POV, which is, I know, just like you, I always thought YouTube was better because it had all the rewind.
It makes it better.
Remember, I don't give a fuck about typing in Twitch chat, so I don't care about that. Like, I'm just doing it for all these. So to me, it was always also, like instantly a VOD appears when it's over. As you say with the rewind, it doesn't matter if you're late. Like, there was a million aspects that were better. But here's the problem. People made the same comments they did about Facebook, about YouTube when ECS went to that. And dude, these comments were literally divorced from reality. People were saying stuff like, this player is like, the tech is bad, or it's all laggy for me. It's like, this can't be true, mate. YouTube is better than Twitch. I even used to say this to people. At the time that was going on, I lived in Korea, where, by the way, Twitch was terrible from Europe compared to other services. I would go to esports events in different countries to attend CS events, and what I would find was Twitch was hit and miss depending on what country I'm in, what the connection's like. YouTube was consistent everywhere in the whole world, as you'd imagine, because it's a massive platform outside of just fucking esports. So my problem is this. I know from Flashpoint, if you present yourself as an alternative and you have even a minor tech hiccup, people are going to roast you alive and be like, you're fucking idiots, you know, succeed. So I can only imagine if people already complain, like, dude, I saw people complain about ESL's like virtual studio they were just running in, like, they're in a fucking online thing and they still had like all these people. Like, if you're going to complain about that for free, people are going to be really harsh about this product if it's pay-per-view. Like, it better be perfect tech. Like, you cannot launch with like and the reason I'm bringing this up, by the way, is from talking to, funny enough, some of the people behind Sniper when me and you were working there, and obviously I still have stock in the company, right? I'll say straight up, I remember the early days of online streaming for stuff like the NBA. It was hit and miss for that as well. Like, you might pay for the NBA pass that when it first came out and get unlucky. Your shit might just be streaming laggy. It's amazing now, but yeah.
The NHL Pass was the worst. Like, that was, I think that came out, that might have come out first. It feels like, at least I used that first, and like that was a huge hit or miss for like, I felt like a long time.
Yes.
Just laggy, just like wouldn't get good connection from Europe at least.
Yep.
It just wasn't a good product. And that was like, that wasn't like an expensive product, wasn't like cheap either. It's like $200 a season or something.
Yep. And so the difference is, like, some of those fans hadn't been in the world we had, where they had the flawless product given them to free. So there was teething problems. People sort of like, they waited and they got past them. And I'll also say this, I noticed those leagues were smart enough in the sports leagues to not push it too heavily till they had the tech sorted, actually. They didn't sort of like make it obnoxious the first season. Because as you're pointing out, everyone would have signed up and gone, what the fuck is this? Like, I had cable a minute ago. Why am I watching this shit on my computer all laggy and stuff? The problem is in esports, like, again, I feel like we do have sort of like spoiled kids, basically. We have, most of the esports fans are like the 12-year-old girl who's like, I wanted the purple pony for my birthday. It's like, still a fucking pony, like the purple one. So I do feel as though that alone would be a massive hill to climb that wouldn't exist for other features of media. Like, I feel like if you don't nail the tech, it's going to be the shortest experiment ever, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be hard. It wouldn't be easy. And I think there's always going to be people who are going to be annoyed and upset and mad about it. But I just think you have to try something. I don't know that that's the idea. I think that's one of the things that I would probably try. I think I would be more inclined to do things that are subscription based than I would to do like PPV based things. Just on the margin, I think. But I think it would be a valuable experiment to see what would happen if you did a PPV event where you invited the 8 best teams in the world and you played like some elaborate, really interesting format that was exciting for fans, all in like a good environment, really good production. I would just be interested. Like, it would just be an interesting experiment. I don't know how many people would pay, and I think you'd have to vary pricing by region. But I would be interested to find out, because I suspect there are more people who would pay than you might think.
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say. I also don't think, because here's another problem we're going to have here, is for a moment to have this discussion, we have to come out of the world where people think that the 100 comments on Reddit represent all the people who watch and consume Counter-Strike. And by the way, spoiler, they can lie on the internet. Like, if anyone hasn't noticed, there's tons of people who pretend they don't watch my content, but bizarrely have like negative comments to say about 400 episodes. Like, you must be watching, motherfucker. So we know you are. You doth protest too much. You pretend you don't. So even though everyone says, and like I said, it's almost like a swag thing of like, oh, I wouldn't pay for that, you bloody loser. Like, in the same sense, right? I do feel though, as though more people would pay than even these companies probably realise. But the problem is you've got to have the balls to go for it. So here's my problem, right? In the short term, I agree. The least amount of risk is actually BESL, take one of your big events, only do it for one, build into it with the whole campaign about this one's going to have to pay for blah, blah, blah. You test if it works, and if it goes really well, obviously then you can roll it out further, right? The problem is this. I actually think, and me and Richard were talking about this on By the Numbers, I actually think the more likely player to succeed, though, is like what you said earlier about the Netflix angle. It's actually, if you're ESL and instead I have a pass that I pay every month, and that gets me all the ESL tournaments, like I actually feel like that would be a more successful. Because you can force me to pay for Cologne, but there's idiots might just not do it on, but like the difference is, the pass basically tells me, am I a real fan of Counter-Strike? If I am, I'm going to have to pay for it. Like, as I said, I myself would literally pay with my own hard-earned money the fucking ESL pack, because they do cover most of the tournaments in the world that I want to watch. It doesn't matter what I think about Carmack, does it? Like, if I want to watch the fucking match, I'd have to pay. So I feel as though actually people would be better served gambling and just going for broke with the circuit and putting the whole circuit on there effectively.
I agree. I think we've beaten that to death. There's one more thing that we kind of skipped over from earlier that I think is worthwhile spending a couple of minutes on before we wrap up, which is the game length issue, which was one of the things that I highlighted that I think was very controversial in most people's eyes. I think more than anything.
Do you think this is contributing to the viewership dip as well, that people are basically bored of the game? Or how long the matches are, and the fact they never end quickly, etc.?
So I would say it a little bit differently. So I think there's one issue, which is that given that you just don't know how long the games might take, and it's not like is it 2 maps or 3 maps, like is it 2 hours or 3 hours? Is it 1.5 hours or 4.5 hours? In the case of like some of the games, like almost 5 hours. And I think even Cologne final is a best of 5. Am I correct? So that could be even longer if so. So like I think, and this is something that impacts me specifically. So like, take that with a grain of salt, but I do think it impacts other people. And based on the response that I've seen and, based on like what my friends have told me, it's the case too. I think if you don't know how long a game is going to take, it's less likely that you're going to plan your day around it. So for example, once people have families, once they're at 30s and 40s, which the whole, like half the premise for growth in Counter-Strike is that every day somebody new is born, and once they're old enough, they might be a Counter-Strike fan, Counter-Strike player. And ideally, you don't lose everybody once they turn 30. You stay a fan even when you're 40 or you're 50 because you just like the game. You don't have to play it. You can still be a fan of the game. I don't play Counter-Strike. I haven't played it in a long time. Played like a couple games here and there, but I haven't played consistently in 9 years. And I still watch it like almost every single day. So, what you want is the new followers to come up, but you also want to retain the old people, if you will. And those old people over time, they have kids, they have families, they have other responsibilities, and it becomes harder for them. And the way you watch games is you literally carve yourself out a couple of hours. So, you might have other things, but you might say that, okay, this is the 2-hour slot that I'm just doing this thing. And, the rest of the day, whatever. But if you don't know if it's 2 hours, if it might be 4 hours, like at some point people around you will be upset and like you're not going to be able to plan around it. And like that's going to force you to not tune in. Now, my premise is, if I don't know if I can watch a game, I'm not watching the first half of it. Like, if I know that I have a dinner at 8 p.m. on the day of an NBA Finals game, I'm not watching from 6 to 8 because I know I'm missing the second half of the fourth quarter. I'm not watching with the first pieces of it. And I suspect if people think that it's unlikely that they're going to get to the end of the match, that I suspect that they're much less likely to even start watching in the first place. And then there's the secondary effect, which is the way schedules work. Because remember, let's say in the NBA, these are different arenas, different broadcasts many times. Like, you might change channels when you go from game to game. So therefore, if one game is delayed, that doesn't have an impact on the other game. Sometimes, like, you lose like a couple of minutes of broadcast unless you go to the local channel, but the game still starts at that time, and generally you have a path to watching it. But here, if the first game is 4.5 hours, you know what that means. It means the second game that you just saved your 3 hours, even 4 hours for, might start 2 hours into when you thought it was going to start. So once again, like, you just can't plan around it. Like, it's not a product that functions for anybody with like other plans or responsibilities. Like, it's like a commit your full day or watch like occasionally type thing. And one more thing that I would just say is, I think that does have an impact on engagement. So put another way, the more engaged I am with the content, the more focused I am when I am watching, the more I'm going to get out of it and more interested I'm going to be in it, and the more likely it is that I'm going to watch the next time. So for example, I assume that you can relate to this. When you were watching HLTV, so not the website, when you used to go inside of the game to watch the games and you could control everything, you would see who you're watching, you'd click around, you'd see the map, watch whatever. You were like 100% focused. It's essentially the same as playing. There is like no passive experience. Therefore, you're fully engaged when you're doing that. So if you watch, you're 100% committed to that. Has, pros and cons, but the upside of that is that you're actually fully engaged when you're watching. Now, the more passive it gets as it goes to streaming first, where you have no control, to everybody watching on TVs, and becomes a thing like, I'll put the game on the background and, do some other stuff. I think it's less likely that you feel like a connection to the game and the results, and less likely that you go out of your way the next time to watch it. Now, like, some of that, like, it's just the nature of the product. Like, we can't expect everybody to watch inside of the game with like interactive controls forever. That would never happen. You would never get to the kind of scale that you would need. But on the other hand, like, if I'm only watching like these half games that I'm missing games, and I'm scheduling around it, but I still can't watch because the first game went to double OT on 2 maps, am I going to watch the next time when I got burned? I don't even know if I can watch. So I think there's a lot of viewers for whom over time, given the scheduling issues and unpredictability of the game and the impact of that on the scheduling, what's happened is they basically just made it like a secondary thing where they actually are doing something else, whether it's like, doing work, talking to somebody else, watching something else. And then like, if the game happens to be on, they might turn it on. And like in my case, in many days of IEM Cologne, I might sometimes forget the TV in the living room on the stream because that's where I'm in the morning. And for example, today I noticed when I went to get coffee before we started recording this that I forgot it on. So that's been a viewer the whole day. And for the days where there were 2 games on, I would have one of the games on my screen here, one of the games on the TV there, and I'd be working here. So theoretically, I'm 3 viewers. That's what I am to ESL. Sure. On the other hand, nowhere am I actually engaged. Yes. With the content. So like, I have a long enough history with it that I don't expect that I will churn out in the, in the coming years, but I could see how somebody might stop watching over time as you pay less and less attention. And at some point you might just realize like, hey, I actually didn't really feel like I missed out on anything. So that's a long-winded kind of, I think, some of my issues with game length. We can talk about solutions later, but curious to first kind of get your thoughts on that piece.
I mean, one of the problems I have with this whole thing is, let me think how to say it. Basically, This is something else we actually briefly touched on By the Numbers. And the whole point you're making about scheduling is something that actually me and Richard have been very cognizant of, just because when we worked with E-League, because obviously on E-League, they had like a set exact time slot for the live show on the Friday night. And they used to literally tell you, dude, like, and they would say it in like fucking like harsh tone where you knew they were serious. They were like, listen, if we run over literally 1 minute over time, it costs like, I can't remember the number, but it was something retarded, like, $50,000 a second, that 1 minute or whatever, like some outrageous. Because the idea was you can play less ads, which means you lose all the money from the ad deliverable, and you potentially cut into another show, which means you probably don't show that show, and you probably have to show like, fucking something that's 20 minutes that's in your catalogue instead of a 30-minute show. So the actual like impact for being slightly over schedule was enormous, and yet you're in fucking CounterStrike, where, as you say, a game that's in the 30th round and one team's about to win 16-14, suddenly it goes 15-15 overtime. Well, let's just keep going, guys. Let's not end like that. You can't really run a sport like that, because if you notice, most sports are set up so that actually either there is like, it's so popular as a sport that it can run over whatever's next, like football's an obvious example. Like, they're going to show you the penalties no matter what was scheduled afterwards, because it's just going to get more views. Or you've got to be in a world where it always ends at an exact time. Like, you don't have overtime. It will literally only be a 90-minute game in the league, and if it's a draw, it's a draw. It's the end of the fucking game. Go home. Now, the problem we have in Counter-Strike is every single format we currently use has this variability. It's just that before the economy got out of control, it wasn't as extreme. Like, the difference is, before it was more like a game could have lasted an hour and a half, or maybe it lasts 2 hours. As you say, the mixture of the economy, I'd even say online elements as well, evened up some of the like sort of skill elements. Like, it just meant like, yeah, as you say, the margin can't be 1.5 to 4.5. It can't be a 3-hour time difference. Like, I can't possibly schedule anything. I can't even schedule my business. By the way, spoiler, you can't schedule a fucking tournament around that. How can I have 2 best of 3s in a day, but then it might be like an 11-hour day or a fucking 5-hour day? That doesn't even make sense for me. Like, as I noticed a point you made, which maybe we'll make the last point actually, about like who you show the games of. They don't even take that into account, dude. Like, if my first series ends really early, I just start some of them with accelerated schedule start showing me a game that all the fucking viewers from Brazil or Russia, they've either gone to bed or they haven't got up yet. So, like, why am I showing the game now? But that's what we're already doing. We're treating every team as though they're all like identical, replaceable units, whereas they very much aren't. And in an entertainment industry, you have to be really cynical at the moment, in my opinion. You have to be like WWE style and make the matches the fans want in a way, That's
the key, that it's the entertainment industry, which means like you should provide people with entertainment. Like is the competitive integrity better if every team has exactly to the minute the same break? Yeah, I would say so. On the other hand, if having that instead of having those teams, with like 3 to 4 hours scheduling difference between their breaks.
Yep.
If the benefit of that is that Navi plays earlier in the morning when all their fans are awake, and Liquid plays later in the day when their fans are finally awake, my guess is you should probably do that.
Yes.
And obviously this is again one of these things where, like, as you said, there's a very, very, very vocal minority that comments on these things and would say, like, I would never watch, I would never put up with this, etc. And I don't know that that's true in many of those cases, but I can understand why many of the people who are, presiding over these things have reluctance to decide against like very vocal commentary from, in some cases, like tens or hundreds of fans over something. But like, that's the industry, and that's why, like, sometimes I think to get changes through, you unfortunately kind of just have to make unpopular decisions and then find out whether they work or not, because otherwise I think you just end up kind of running in the same place and probably not changing anything at all.
Because for me, that is a major issue. I know in your thread, people might have thought it was like a minor side issue. And in fact, I'm sure many of them think, you're just saying that because you're from MIBR and you just want Brazilian fans. Like, no, what they're missing there is that, like, think of how the discussion started. We made the point that you either need to literally increase the number of people watching. Well, good luck if you can fucking figure that out. Or you need to get more money in the space. I mean, that's like that joke before. What colour unicorn you want? Like, fucking hell, it's harder to get money in the space. So, like, but both at the moment, they're not impossible, but they're pretty hard, right? There's a reason why everyone's scratching their head. Well, the problem in this scenario is Let's at least maximize what we've got right now before we start trying to like fucking, you know, turn on another tap or plug another hole. Let's maximize what we've got now, because that's one area I do think is massively misunderstood, is the scheduling of tournaments. Another one that kills me, dude, is where someone literally will run I'm talking like a massive event like IEM Cologne right now. They'll run an enormous event, and it's almost like whoever the guy scheduling the matches and deciding what was on the Airstream was just like one of those cunts, like, you know, the pro players who are like, but he's my mate. Why would I kick him? And you're like, because he's bad at the game. Like, no, but he's a friend and he will get... I should have done it in a French accent just to make it funny there, obviously. You know, everyone knows the players I'm talking about. Well, in this scenario, right, dude, I've seen people pick games, no joke, where they put like the best team in the world on the B stream, and they're like, but you know, we want to like promote like smaller teams, so we're going to put these two underdogs on the A stream. It's like, are you aware this is an entertainment industry where we're all losing money? That makes no sense. That is totally inappropriate. I mean, you might know this yourself from working as talent. A few years back, they even used to run talent like that. And they would literally, behind closed doors, say to like some casters, Anderson said, like, we're actually going to give the final to these like smaller casters because they've never done one before, and you're going to get the semi-final. And I used to be sat there like, do you just want less viewers for the final? Something like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, the first thing you do is put like the most famous, the most popular casters on the biggest game. That's like check mark one of doing the tournament schedule. But actually, TOs seem to be way off. They're not really in tune with what we're talking about on this one. I don't feel like I don't think a lot of them kind of understand what we're discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the whole like people being friends with one another, etc. thing plays a part. I mean, there's also cases where like I'm sure you're aware of like some teams, particularly in tournament formats, where for, you know, let's just say you might start playing on a different day because of the format. Like, for example, DreamHack Opens, I think, are a good example. You know, you typically play Group A on day one, Group B on day two, and then the elimination games, and then get to playoffs. You know, like a lot of the times those groups, the way those groups get decided in part is like if somebody says that I have like a travel reason, I can't get there that day. Yes. You know, the big name team says like, we won't come there on Thursday, but if you put us on the Friday group, we'll come in. And like sometimes there's a couple of teams that say that, and like that's why the group is just like wrong and the matchups are poor, etc. And like, you know, we can talk about whether that's like the only way to get the big team, in which case like that might be the right way, but like that's the kind of stuff that happens. And I think there's a bunch of times, like you said, where it should not happen and there's not actual cost. So, you know, for example, if a tournament is already ongoing, everybody's at the tournament, it's not like some team is going to forfeit themselves out because their schedule isn't the one they want once they're already there, for example. So I agree with you. I think there would be a bunch of ways that you could further optimize it. And I guess like going back to the length a little bit, like I would just like to see more use of best of ones, for example. I don't know if how much people have spent time looking at it, but the Blast tournaments that had those infamous best of one formats that everybody quote unquote hated had great viewership, just great viewership compared to comparable tournaments. And I think it's because do you know
any numbers off your head? Obviously I don't mean like specific, but like for example, when you say like comparable, was some of the Blast Pro series you ever getting like, you know, what like a DreamHack Masters would or something, like, you know, in theory a much better format? Was it up there?
So I pulled up one of the files that I have when I was looking away from the camera when we were talking a little before. So Blast Pro Series Copenhagen, for example, had the same average viewership as IEM Oakland, had the same average viewership as, remember, the Epic Epicenter event where SK played VP in the finals. Okay. Basically the same viewership as that year's CSL New York. I think that was the Liquid Mouse Sports final. Yep. Just barely below DreamHack Masters Malmo. So like many of those tournaments, like they just did really well viewership wise. And I think the same goes like Blast Pro Istanbul 2018 was, I think, like the 5th highest average viewership for the year. For 2018 in average viewership terms, I think Lisbon was basically the same as Katowice.
And you think the best ones contribute to this? Well,
I mean, look, I don't have the answer. I suspect that one of the reasons is like, one, you have very good teams, so people want to watch. Two, it's that you have a very predictable schedule. You know exactly when games are going to start. You know how long they're going to take. Like, it's very easy for me to say that, like, okay, so at 2 p.m., MIBR plays Astralis. I'm watching that game, for example. It's not they play the second game or the third game of the day, so it could be somewhere between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. start time. I suspect that at least part of that was driven by the fact that it was best of ones, so it's very manageable game length. It's easy to just go watch a game, and I think also it's predictable like when games will start. I mean, look, I'll tell you, I put off watching. I remember in like 2008, I think between like tournaments back when I was a player, we'd usually take like a week off after tournaments. Like big tournaments, like major equivalents, to kind of just like relax and then come back fresh after. And during those weeks, I started watching the IMDb top 250 movies, basically in order, just to like, watch all the movies that I'd like missed out on. And even I noticed that like if a movie is 3 hours, even if it's like an all-time classic, I'm just less likely to watch it sometimes than a 1.5 hour. And I think I just think that's generally speaking true. It's easier to commit yourself to something shorter. It's the same as like, I'm more likely to binge watch a show that has 20-minute episodes than 40-minute episodes, even if the 40-minute show is better. And that's because I don't want to watch something in half, and 20 minutes you can commit to very easily all the time. You can delay things by 20 minutes. You can go out 20 minutes later, you can have dinner 20 minutes later. But an hour, like 40 minutes is like close to an hour. That's harder. So I suspect that has an impact. Like, can't quantify it, but I think those events specifically, I think, have some compelling viewership data that I think has been overlooked by many people, in part because, one, there were, I think, U.S. government-related restrictions to getting stuff to Istanbul at the time. Like trade restrictions at the time of the event. So that event was like a massive loss financially. And that was the first year of Blast, really, because they only did the Copenhagen event in 2017. So, they were still like kind of ramping up even their commercial team, much less like getting close to monetizing it efficiently. So I think people kind of overlooked that. I think and I think the other piece is like, the feedback online. I think most people said that they disliked the event, disliked best of ones, didn't like that. I think in reality, I think there's a lot of people who like the fact that every map that they're watching actually matters. They don't have to wait for the third map. It's OT now in FaZe Gambit on my screen. Base is up 1-0. The pressure is not identical between the two. Like, would this be more exciting if it were the final map? Well, I mean, I've done some research to it, and I'm not saying it's like it's like perfect 1-for-1, but like, a lot of the time, wouldn't you know, either the better team wins their own map and the worst team wins their own map, and you go to the third map, which would have been the map anyway, if they vetoed down the best of one, or the better team wins the other map as well, and it's 2-0. So like, I honestly just, based on like the data that I've skimmed through, and it's a bunch of manual labor, and obviously like it's not perfect because you also you prefer for the game differently if it's best of one, like all these different things are taken into account, some of which I think favor the better team because they would take less risks, etc. But I think best of ones, generally speaking, more exciting, better product than people give it credit for. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that just has a very bad rep, and I think I don't think it's very likely that we're getting a lot more of them. But I that's something that I would like to see use more.
I mean, first of all, I think you're definitely right. Like, unfortunately, people aren't going to go back to best of one just conceptually. Like, people have just, like, that ship's sort of sailed. People have decided best of three's the best format, The problem is, and obviously it goes without saying, players are always going to say, because they're always going to feel like they're going to win the best of three instead of the best of one.
They want the safety net. They want the safety net, less variance.
I even think as well, by the way, they've sort of done themselves a disservice as well, because I also do actually think one of the reasons, especially in the online era, that so many games go to 3 maps is exactly because when you're 1-0 up, dude, Navi's the worst example of this ever. If Navi really know that it's a 14-14 game and it's the decider, Navi will play like they're trying to win the fucking game. If they're 1 map up and the second map's 14-14, everyone in the world knows they lose that second map and will go 3 maps. Like, that's just who that fucking team is. When there's no pressure, they don't play their best. Like, they're just one of those teams. So I even think that's even a factor. Like, players also, in a way, want to be able to be lazy in the series and go, well, listen, there's plenty of time for us to win the second map. Or, if we, that's like fucking cope, isn't it? But the other problem is, this is also a unique format problem to specifically esports, because obviously if you have a best of 3 series, part of the problem, we said it in hours, but part of the problem is it could be a fast 2-0, it could be a really long 3-map series, and the difference is the 4.5 to 1.5 hours, right? Well, one of the problems is that doesn't exist in sports. Like even in the NHL where you play a best of 7, yeah, the matches are on different days. So I can still schedule appropriately, and I've got plenty of time to, rejig my schedule if it's a quick 4-0. Like, it's not the end of the world. Unfortunately, in esports, because we're playing it all on the same day, it does mean that best of 3 is always going to be a very flawed format for the entertainment, like the broadcast side of it, unfortunately. It's never going to be the most satisfying for, like, the average fan.
That's why we really need to get the CO format back. But,
that was also what we actually...
would actually solve a lot of the problems.
Here's the problem, mate. That was actually what I literally brought up on the end of the last By the Numbers episode, which the VOD isn't out for. I basically said the reason why, the best selling point of that is it's like an American football game. I can tell you roughly exactly how long it lasts. Like, it's 20 minutes for both. By the way, you can make it less. You can make it 10 minutes. But let's say it's 20 minutes.
You can also make it more if you, you can also make it more if you wanted to.
Yes.
Then it sort of
But we can schedule that a lot more easily.
Yeah.
It goes out. The problem is this, as has been a theme of this episode, you've got another massive conceptual mountain to climb there where I've got to convince pro players to fucking play. So only T rounds count, and the stupid ass fans going to be, what's going to buy the CT's not going in? Like, the problem with that is it's just like the pay-per-view thing. It's obviously a good solution, but the initial adoption period is the hardest part. I feel like that's the mountain to overcome.
Yeah.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Shenlong, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Kris, Dean Tanglis, Doomseer, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Bot Pounder 420, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or guests to come on my shows? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs where I might even insult you in a funny or maybe obnoxious manner? Do you want teasers for my upcoming content, things I'm thinking of, what I might be changing? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions where we go all over the place with the big donators? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is using the Patreon link in the description box below to join the Screwluminati today.